So let's start with a few minutes to settle down, get our minds into a good state for what we are doing here. We'll just take a few minutes to get into a comfortable but conducive position, sitting position, and relax as much as possible. Be aware of your breathing, your breath flowing in and flowing out. And let your mind settle down into the present place and present moment. Put aside other thoughts for now. And now bring into your mind the positive, altruistic attitude or motivation. What we are learning in this semester, or in this particular part of the semester, is the path to enlightenment. And we're now on the great scope, which is all about how to cultivate bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha, to help all living beings. So this is the highest possible aspiration one could have for wanting to help others. And so really try to make that your motivation, that you do want to help others as much as you can, and that you would like to learn things from this class, take away things from this class that will help you to be of benefit to others in your life now and also in the future. Okay, so today I'm going to go through the 7-point cause and effect method for developing bodhicitta. You probably heard this before, and you probably did some meditation on it. Doesn't hurt to hear it again. There's a lot of really profound and beautiful points in this method. So it's good to hear it again. So there's 7 points that are meant to be meditated on to develop in our mind bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is the thought or the attitude, I want to become a Buddha, fully enlightened Buddha, in order to help all other living beings. So this is quite a big deal, quite a big task to take upon oneself. And so it's not easy to really, we can have thoughts like, oh yeah, I want to become enlightened, I want to help all living beings. But we may not fully understand what is involved in becoming enlightened. It's actually not easy. It's a lot of work, a lot of time and effort. So, but anyway, this method that has 7 points is a kind of step-by-step way to develop bodhicitta in our mind. And there's also a kind of prelude to the 7 points, and that is equanimity. It's not included in the 7 points because they say some people already have it. Some people already have equanimity, and so they don't need to meditate on that. But I think it's rare. Most people don't have it, and so we do need to meditate on it. And you probably have done this meditation before. So equanimity in general is a even-minded attitude towards others, as opposed to discriminating others. We usually put people into groups: friends, people I like; enemies, people I don't like; strangers, people I don't really care about, people I'm kind of indifferent to. So that's our usual state of mind. Equanimity is the opposite of that. We see everyone as equally deserving of our care, our concern, our attention, our energy to help. We don't leave anybody out. And it's very important, because if we don't cultivate equanimity, and then we start meditating on loving kindness and compassion and so on, we might do so in a biased, uneven way. We might develop a lot of loving kindness and compassion for some people, but then others we say, no way, they don't deserve my love, my compassion. That wouldn't be right. That wouldn't lead us to Buddhahood. So we have to be willing to open our hearts to every single person, every single being. And that's not easy. Some people are pretty difficult. So the way to meditate on equanimity, there's actually a few different ways of doing it, but the usual way, and the way you've probably done before, is thinking of individual people towards whom you have different feelings. And it's actually said, what I've been reading recently, that it's good to start with a person that we have neutral feelings for. Don't start with a friend, because we don't have equanimity with regard to friends. We favor our friends. and so the attitude we have towards strangers, or people we don't know, people we're not really close to, that's actually closer to equanimity than the feelings we have for our friends. So it's recommended that we bring to mind a person that we don't. It could be a neighbor, or somebody at work, or just some stranger on the street. You just bring to mind that person and look at your feelings towards them, and recognize you don't have strong liking, nor do you have strong aversion. Just kind of a neutral feeling. But then you contemplate how this person is basically just like me. He's a human being. They have a body, they have a mind, they have thoughts, they have feelings. They want to be happy, and they don't want to suffer, just like me. So you meditate on that, you contemplate that, and that'll probably help your heart to open more to that person and feel more concerned about them. And then, after meditating like that on a neutral person, like a stranger, then you can think of a friend. A friend could be somebody in your family, or just a friend, someone you like, someone you care about, someone you have good feelings for. And then look at your feelings for that person, and maybe you can recognize that you have some bias towards that person. You sort of favor that person over others. But then again, you meditate on how this person also wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer, just like me. So we're basically the same. It's also helpful to contemplate how there's no permanence in our relationships with our friends and our family. There's no guarantee they will last forever. They could change. Relationships can change. In Buddhism, they say relationships can change from one life to the next. In one lifetime, somebody may be a close friend, someone you really love and care about. But in the next life, you might meet that person again, but you're like this. You have conflicts with them. You see them as an enemy. So these relationships can change. They also change within one life. We've all I'm sure we've all had that experience of somebody at one point in time we were really close to, I have really good feelings for, a really good relationship with, but then things change and we might just have the opposite kind of relationship. Can't stand each other. You can't even bear to be in the same room with each other. Have you had that experience before with anybody? Probably when we're young. Maybe when we get older or more mature, we don't have that experience. But it does happen. It does happen. So relationships and the feelings we have for others are very changeable, very subject to change, to conditions, causes and conditions. So, we're not trying to turn our friend into an enemy, but we're just trying to recognize that it's not fixed, it's not definite. This person will always be in that position of friend, someone we care about. And finally, we bring to mind a person we dislike, we have not good feelings for. And so we bring that person to mind, imagine them there in front of us. And we also contemplate how, yeah, this is just another human being like me. They have a body, they have a mind, they have thoughts and feelings. They want to be happy and they don't want to suffer, just like me, just like everybody else. So we have things in common. Oneself and all these other people, we're all, certain things we all share, we all have in common. And then it's also helpful to contemplate that that relationship also isn't necessarily fixed and permanent. That could change. Things could change and we could become closer. We could start having warm feelings, positive feelings towards that person, maybe even become friends. So Buddhism says this can happen from one life to the next, but it can also happen within one lifetime. So we probably had experiences like that as well. So a lot of it really depends on our own mind, on our thoughts, our feelings, our attitudes, how we see others. So that's roughly how to develop equanimity. And developing equanimity doesn't mean that we have the exact same relationship with everybody. That's actually not possible. There's some people we just can't get close to. They may not want to be close to us, even if we want to be close to them. And also Yangsi Rinpoche in the book says that this practice should not invalidate friends and enemies entirely, making them non-existent. So we're not erasing this whole notion of friends and enemies. And another book about developing bodhicitta says that temporary friend, temporary enemy, and temporary neutral person do in fact exist. However, there is no such thing as a permanent or unchanging friend, enemy, or neutral person. Okay, so that's what we're trying to work on. Seeing these relationships as permanent, fixed, unchanging, they'll be like this forever. And so my understanding is that we're not denying that some people are kind to us and helpful to us and that we can just get along with them more easily. We're not denying that. We're also not denying that there are some people who are hostile and they may even hate us and they may even try to harm us. We're not denying that. But just to recognize that these kind of situations are temporary. They depend on causes and conditions, and those can change. They're not permanent. So Yangsi Rinpoche says, by cultivating equanimity, we are merely trying to target the obsessive mind of attachment that we have in relation to friends and the aggressive mind of anger that we have in relation to enemies and neutralize these. I hope that makes it clear, because sometimes people get confused about equanimity and think that it means, oh, we have to have the exact same relationship with everybody. We have to have the exact same feelings and perceptions with everybody. And that's not true. We're just trying to open our hearts and feel everybody does deserve our care, our attention, our compassion. Okay, then the first point of the 7 points is recognizing that all beings are or have been our mother. This is an extremely difficult one, even for Tibetans who usually believe in reincarnation, past lives and future lives. But still, to actually think that every single person has been your mother in some past life, it's not easy. So the Buddha himself did talk about this. I came across the quotation from the Buddha in one of the Pali Sutras, where he said, he's talking to his disciples, monks, this samsara is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. It is not easy, monks, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your mother. And then he went on to say the same about your father, your brother, your sister. So we had so many lives before this one, countless lives, in fact. And so the idea is we've been in every possible kind of relationship with everybody. Everybody's been our mother, our father, our brother, our sister, our friend, our enemy, our child. They've also been our child. We've been their mothers. So we've had all these relationships with others. And if you think about that, that means we have been in loving relationships with every single living being. We have loved them, they have loved us, and we've been really dear to each other. So there's really nobody who's a stranger, a total stranger. It's not easy to accept that, but even to just think about that possibility is quite mind-blowing. Yeah, it can really blow our mind and really open our heart to others. And the reason they focus on mother here is because usually she's the one who gives us the greatest amount of kindness, because she brings us into this world and then feeds us when we're really small, helpless, totally dependent on others. So she's there to take care of us. And so she's usually mothers are the greatest example of loving kindness and compassion. And so if we can see them as mothers, that really does help us to open our hearts, feel appreciative, feel grateful, and want to help them in return. But some people in the West have complicated relationships with their mothers, and thinking of mother doesn't necessarily bring up warm feelings. It might bring up a lot of pain, a lot of anguish, and so on. So you don't have to think of your mother. You can think of somebody else from whom you have received a lot of kindness. And thinking of that person does bring up warm feelings in you. So it's fine to think of some other person besides your mother. And in fact, recently I've been looking at this little book I found in our library here. It's called How to Expand Love by the Dalai Lama. It's a really nice little book. And basically it's this 7-point cause and effect method, but it's, in very simple language, very simple terms. And so this particular point we're looking at now, it actually uses the word friend instead of mother. It says recognizing all beings are our friends, okay? So you can play around with that and find whatever image works best for you, mother or father or grandmother or friend, yeah, teacher, someone who's helped you a lot in your life, and use that as an example, and then contemplate, well, everyone has been in that role. Everyone has shown me that same kind of kindness that that person has shown me. So then the second point is recalling their kindness. So there we actually contemplate specific acts of kindness we have received from that person, whether it's our mother or friend or grandmother or father or whatever. And they use the example of the mother in the text because she does a lot for us usually. And for me personally, that was not difficult to do because my mother was a very loving, kind, and dedicated mother. You know, she really loved having babies and she loved her babies and she really took care of us to the best of her ability. So you can just think, you know, imagine yourself as this little tiny thing, you know, you've seen babies, so you know what a baby looks like. So we were like that once. Yeah, so tiny and so helpless and so totally dependent. We wouldn't have been able to survive. We would have died if it wasn't for the people who were there and taking care of us. And so just thinking, I mean, and you're all parents, so you know firsthand what's involved in taking care of a small baby. So put yourself on the other end of that. Imagine yourself as a small baby and how you were cared for by your mother, your father, and whoever else was there. And you know, it's really a full-time job, especially in the first couple of months or the first year or two. Baby has so many needs and a lot of physical work, feeding the baby, changing their diapers, their clothes, bathing them, but also emotionally. Babies don't just need food, but they need to be held and they need to be cuddled and they need to be talked to and laughed with and played with and so on. So they need a great deal of attention. And then as we grow older, we start to move around more. And then it's usually our parents who are like our first teachers. They teach us, you know, how to walk, how to stand, how to, well, first crawl and then stand and then walk. And then gradually how to, you know, feed ourselves with a spoon and a cup and then how to wear clothes, how to put clothes on and how to talk. Yeah, so these skills, these, you know, really basic skills, we didn't know how to do those things on our own. So we needed our parents to teach us those things. So they were also like our first teacher. And then even when we're older and we become more independent, we're going to school and playing with our friends, but we still depend on our mother and father and so on to take us here and there. And again, cook food, cook our meals and wash our clothes and help us do our homework and so on and so forth. So, you know, in some cases, mothers and fathers continue to be there for their children, even when they're adults and they become parents themselves. But, you know, parents are still there to help, to be a what do you call it? Babysit, to babysit their grandchildren while we're at work. So anyway, you can spend a lot of time doing that meditation of the kindness of mothers, and then the point is to think that everybody has been in that role. Everybody has shown us that same kindness as my mother and father of this lifetime. And so contemplating this, it takes time, it takes energy, but it really does open our hearts to others. And then the next point, number 3, is wishing to repay the kindness. And that's something that naturally arises when we do clearly see kindness, the kindness that someone else has shown us, the things they have done for us. It just naturally, I mean, unless you're a really hard-hearted person, it naturally opens our heart and we just feel grateful and appreciative. And then whenever that person needs help, we just drop everything we're doing and rush to help them. Okay, so if we did have a loving and caring mother when we were small, and we really recognize her kindness whenever she needs help, if she's sick and has to go to the hospital, we just drop everything and rush there and take her to the hospital and do whatever we can to take care of her. So that's just what arises naturally when we do really get in touch with what somebody else has done for us. So then, if everybody has been our mother, if we can really feel that, see that, understand that, every single person has been our mother. So you look around the room right now, and I can see Noah and Firas and Simona and Michal and Yael and Antal. So every one of you has been my mother. So not just my mother of this lifetime has taken care of me, shown me that kind of kindness, but every single one of you also has done that to me. So if I really see that, I really understand that, then wow, it really makes me feel close to everybody, and not just close, but also grateful. This feeling of gratitude. Oh, you have been so kind to me. So whenever you need help, then I'll be there for you. I'll take care of you and do whatever I can to help you. So that's the kind of thought, or the kind of feeling, the kind of attitude that arises when we do this meditation again and again and again and again. And Tibetans, this idea is so much part of their culture. They have prayers. Most Tibetans are Buddhist, and they recite prayers every day. And in the prayers, there's this phrase, Ma Sem Chen, which means mother sentient beings. Mother sentient beings. So they are reciting that probably a number of times every day. Ma Sem Chen, mother sentient beings. And so that's kind of imprinted into their minds. And you can see it in their eyes, especially the elderly, the elder Tibetans who have, really grounded in Buddhist ideas and Buddhist practices. Yeah, their eyes and their faces, there's so much loving kindness, so much compassion. Even if you're a total stranger, they look at you like, oh, you are so precious, you are so dear. Sorry. And so this is what a person does if they do want to follow the Bodhisattva path and develop bodhicitta and become enlightened. They train their mind in this way. And gradually it just becomes more and more their default mode, their natural way of being, natural way of thinking. Seeing every sentient being as precious, as dear, because they've been my mother. They've been kind to me. Long lost mother, I haven't seen you for such a long time, and now you're there again. You reappeared in my life. What can I do for you? So you can kind of imagine how that would change our perspective on others. And so then, wishing to repay the kindness, there's different ways of doing that. One is just to be kind, to treat others with kindness, and helping them as much as we can in this lifetime. But then in the Buddhist worldview, we in the medium scope, we contemplate how we're in samsara, we're stuck in samsara, we're subject to having to die and take rebirth again and again and again and again. And so this is the situation for sentient beings, mother sentient beings. They are in samsara, just like me, and under the control of delusions and karma, and subject to all the different kinds of sufferings of samsara, the 8 kinds of suffering and the 6 kinds of suffering and the 3 kinds of suffering. So you were meditating on that already in the medium scope. You're very familiar with it in terms of yourself and how you were stuck in samsara. So then you apply that to others. You think, oh, they're in samsara too, and it's terrible. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they could be free? And I want to help them be free. I don't want them to have all these sufferings. I want them to be free of suffering. I want them to be happy. So you apply that understanding to them and realize that the best way that you can help them isn't just giving them, food and clothes and medicine in this lifetime. Of course, that's good to do too, but they'll still be in samsara, stuck in samsara. So you want to help them be free of samsara. So you have this very long-term vision. I want to help all these mothers, all these kind mother sentient beings, to be free of samsara and to attain nirvana, the peace, the bliss of nirvana, and beyond that, to attain enlightenment. They all have the potential. Buddha nature, they have the potential to become enlightened. And so that's the best way to help them, is to help them all reach enlightenment. So these are the kind of contemplations you can do in terms of how to repay the kindness of my mothers. What's the best way to repay their kindness? Helping them reach enlightenment. And then the next point is loving kindness. Number 4, loving kindness. So loving kindness is defined as the wish to help sentient beings have happiness. So in general, that's the meaning of love, wishing others to have happiness. But in this context, in the context of this 7-point cause and effect method, the loving kindness that is generated at this point, after contemplating those first 3 points, that everyone has been my mother and they have been kind to me and I want to repay their kindness. So this gives rise to a special kind of loving kindness, which they say the best example of this is the feelings that a mother has for her little child. So many of you know that, those who have been mothers, but fathers too can have this kind of love for their child, especially when they're first born, this brand new being has just come into existence. We have brought this baby into the world, and it's like the most beautiful, precious thing that exists, and you're just totally devoted, totally dedicated to taking care of it and making sure it has whatever it needs to be happy. So you just want this being to be happy. So that kind of feeling that mothers and fathers have for their small children, they say that's the kind of loving kindness that is here, number 4. That's the kind of feeling that we ideally are trying to cultivate towards every sentient being. And that same kind of feeling. So there's a story about Atisha, great Indian master, when he went to Tibet and he was teaching in Tibet. And one time he was approached by a woman, and she asked him, what is this feeling of loving kindness? What does that mean? And she was a mother, so she had her little baby with her, or maybe on her back or whatever. So Atisha said, the same feeling you have for your baby, you have that feeling for everyone else, every other being. And she was like, oh, wow, that's difficult. It is difficult, but that is the ideal thing. And it's not impossible. If we do these meditations again and again and again, then gradually this kind of feeling will come up towards others. And so in the teachings, it said the way to meditate on this 4th point is, again, to bring to mind individual people, starting with those we already care about. We find it easy to love them. So our family, our friends, and so on, we think of them and we think, oh, this person has been my mother and they have been so kind to me and I want to repay their kindness. And then we generate this feeling of loving kindness for them. I want this person to be happy, to have every possible kind of happiness and so on. So we start with the easy people, and then we move on to those who are a little bit more distant from us, like strangers, people we're not so close to, and then gradually bring in the difficult people, the ones we find difficult to like. So we do it in that way, first with individuals, and then we open up and think of all living beings and wish all of them to have happiness. And then point number 5 is great compassion. So great compassion, well, in general, compassion is wishing others to be free of suffering. So it's very similar to love. They're like two sides of a coin, or two sides of a hand, front side, back side. In fact, I read something the Dalai Lama said, they're really just two aspects of the same mind. Yeah, so the feelings that we have towards those we really care about, we love them, we want them to be happy, we do whatever we can to help them be happy, but at the same time, we want them to not suffer. We don't want bad things to happen to them. We don't want them to have pain or unhappiness or meet with misfortune or bad circumstances. So those two states of mind of loving kindness and compassion are very, very similar, very close. But great compassion, when the word great is there, that's a special kind of compassion. I'll explain it in a minute. But yeah, so it said that in Buddhism, Buddha taught everyone, all his followers, to cultivate compassion. And so some of the Buddhist followers wish, their goal is not to attain enlightenment, full Buddhahood, full enlightenment, but their goal is to attain nirvana, liberation for themselves. So those are the terms for those kind of practitioners are hearers or shravakas, and solitary realizers, partaker Buddhas. So those are followers of the Buddha who don't follow the Bodhisattva path, don't work for enlightenment, but work for nirvana, their own liberation. But they still cultivate compassion. That's still part of their path, their practice, to cultivate love for all living beings and compassion for all living beings. So it's not that they are completely self-centered and don't care about other beings. They do. They do, or they should anyway. They should cultivate love and compassion for all living beings. But in the Bodhisattva path, the kind of compassion that the Bodhisattva develops is called great compassion. And so that's distinguished from the kind of compassion cultivated by the hearers and the solitary realizers, because in their case, they cultivate this feeling of compassion. I want all beings to be free of suffering. May they not suffer. But they don't go the extra step of saying, I will do it myself. I will ensure that sentient beings do not suffer. They don't take on that kind of responsibility. But in the case of a bodhisattva does do that. So they kind of shoulder the responsibility. I myself will do what it takes in order to help all sentient beings be free of their suffering. So that's the meaning of great compassion. It's more than just wishing sentient beings to be free of suffering, but it's I will make them free of suffering. I will do what it takes. So that's also similar to the feelings that parents have when they bring a child into the world. The child has a lot of needs. It needs food, it needs clothing, it needs, when it's sick, it needs to be taken to the hospital and so on and so forth. So it needs a lot of care to make sure it doesn't suffer. So parents, good parents, have that responsibility. They don't feel it's up to my neighbor to feed my child. It's up to my neighbor to take my child to the hospital when they're sick. They don't, I mean, that would be weird if parents were to think that way. So they don't. They feel it's my responsibility to do whatever needs to be done for this child. So that's how a bodhisattva feels, but towards all living beings. My responsibility, it's my responsibility to do whatever it takes to help sentient beings be free of suffering. So that's the meaning of great compassion. So we all do have compassion. It's a natural quality in everybody's mind. When we see somebody suffering, or we hear about suffering, or we think about suffering, compassion naturally arises. Well, most people, maybe there's some people who are deficient in compassion, but I think everyone does have it to a certain extent. But here we are trying to cultivate this compassion more and more, grow it, increase it more and more and more and more and more, until eventually it becomes great compassion for all living beings, feeling this responsibility like parents for their children. I will help all sentient beings be free of their suffering. So it does take time. And in fact, recently we've been studying a wonderful text by Dharmakirti called the Pramanavartika. The Dalai Lama really, he loves this text. He said it's really important to study it. So one of the points in this text is about how the Buddha cultivated great compassion. And he said that Buddha did this for a long time, for many, many lifetimes. He cultivated his compassion, familiarized himself with compassion, and developed great compassion. So he spent many lifetimes doing this. And in the beginning, it takes effort. You have to put effort into cultivating compassion. It doesn't come naturally. But after familiarizing with compassion for a long time, then it becomes effortless. It just naturally arises. You don't have to make effort anymore. It's just as soon as you see a sentient being or hear or think of a sentient being, this great compassion will arise naturally. Number 6, Yangsi Rinpoche calls it the supreme thought that takes responsibility for others. That's quite a long phrase. Some books call it the exceptional attitude or universal responsibility. Anyway, there's different ways of calling it, but it arises after all the previous steps. So after cultivating all the other steps, including loving kindness and great compassion, you reach the point where you want to take on the responsibility of freeing them from suffering and bringing them happiness. And so this is like making the commitment, making the decision, making the commitment. I will do it. I will ensure that every sentient being has happiness, not just ordinary happiness, but up to the highest happiness of enlightenment. And I will ensure that they are free from every suffering, every type of suffering. So here is where you're really taking on that responsibility. The other steps are kind of leading to this. You're gradually developing this responsibility, but this is where you actually make sure you shoulder this responsibility, like the parents' feelings towards their children. And then the 7th point is bodhicitta. And so this is the final result of all the other points that you've been meditating on. Because when you take on this responsibility, and it is something genuine and sincere. You really do want to help all sentient beings have happiness and be free of suffering. But then you have to be realistic and say, well, how can I do that? How is it possible for me to do that? And of course, that there is such a thing as enlightenment or Buddhahood. And that's the state that the Buddha achieved. And so you contemplate the qualities of enlightenment, Buddhahood, and you realize that that's what I have to do. I have to become a Buddha. I have to become fully enlightened in order to fulfill this responsibility to help all beings have happiness and be free of suffering. If I'm just an ordinary being, I can't do that. It's impossible. And so I have to become a Buddha. I have to develop the qualities of a Buddha in order to help all sentient beings. So that's bodhicitta. So the previous 6 causes are the previous 6 points are the causes, and then bodhicitta is the result of that, what arises. And in the beginning, it's still something contrived. You have to put effort into these thoughts and these feelings, but with time, with familiarity, you get to the point where it just arises naturally by itself, spontaneously. I will become a Buddha in order to help all sentient beings. So when it does arise in a natural, effortless, uncontrived way, that's the point at which a person becomes a bodhisattva. Yeah. So a bodhisattva is someone who has uncontrived, effortless bodhicitta. And Yangsi Rinpoche in the book says, it's important to understand what the state of enlightenment is, what kind of qualities and abilities a Buddha has. And so that's something that does take time, and we do need to study. I mean, a lot of people talk about enlightenment, but they may have just some vague idea of what it means to be enlightened. Oh, you're a really nice person and you're really happy and peaceful all the time. Well, enlightenment is a lot more than that. As what we're talking about here, the enlightenment of a Buddha is much more than that. So it really is a big deal. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort to learn, to meditate, to practice in order to reach full enlightenment. And we also need to feel that it's possible. We need to, have the confidence that we do have the potential to reach enlightenment. So that's the topic of Buddha nature, which you've heard about, learned about. So we also need to learn about that, meditate on that. What is Buddha nature? What exactly is this potential that I have to reach enlightenment? And how do I develop it? How do I cultivate it? Okay, so there's one other point to talk about. This was in Yangsi Rinpoche's explanation, the second slide in your little slideshow, and it's obstacles to the practice of bodhicitta. And he talks about 2 main obstacles. One is called self-centeredness or self-cherishing, and the other is ignorance that grasps everything as truly existent. So I just wanted to give a bit more information about self-centeredness, sometimes called self-cherishing, from another book by the Dalai Lama. He mentions different levels of this self-centeredness. It's not always the same. So a very coarse level of self-centeredness is where we think, I am more important than others, and I just want happiness in this lifetime. Okay, so this is an attitude that probably most of us do have. I am more important than others. I am in the center of the universe, and I'm just looking out for happiness, pleasure, fulfillment, satisfaction in this present lifetime. And that kind of self-centeredness isn't always negative. I mean, it could motivate us to just have a family, have a job, do the normal things that people do just to feel satisfied and fulfilled. But it can also lead to some pretty ugly behavior. violent and harmful behavior. It can arise from self-centeredness. People kill others or steal from others, lie, cheat, and so on, just to get their own happiness in this lifetime. So that's the worst form of self-centeredness that leads to suffering. Then he just says there's a less coarse form of self-centeredness where we still feel more important than others, but we go beyond just this lifetime. We think about the future. We think that, okay, after this life, there'll be another life. Or in the case of theistic religions, my soul will go on and will go to heaven or go to hell or whatever. I want to go to heaven, so I better do good deeds. So people who have this level of self-centeredness, they're still mainly concerned about themselves, but they want to ensure that in the next life, when after this life ends, they will have good experiences rather than suffering ones. And so that will motivate them to do what is virtuous and avoid what is non-virtuous. So that can lie behind virtuous actions like being ethical, being generous, being kind, taking care of others, doing social work, and so on. So that they're creating the cause for fortunate rebirths in future lives. But it's still kind of mainly about me, my happiness. And then the third level of self-centeredness is, he calls it subtle. And this is the attitude that says, I want to attain liberation for myself alone. So this is the attitude that we have, that is in the minds of like the hearers and the solitary realizers. So these are followers of the Buddha, and they have faith in the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, and they want to practice the path. But their goal is their own liberation, nirvana. I want to get out of samsara and not be in samsara anymore, not have to take rebirth anymore. So I want to attain nirvana, liberation. And it's not that they lack compassion, like I was saying before. They do have compassion and love for others, but they don't go that extra step of, I am going to take care of sentient beings and help them be free of samsara, help them achieve liberation. So they're just getting themselves out of samsara. So this is a subtle level of self-centeredness or self-cherishing. And it is an obstacle to the bodhisattva's path, because a bodhisattva needs to get beyond just thinking of oneself and one's own happiness and one's own freedom from suffering, and take on that responsibility to help everybody else do it. So so these are different levels of self-centeredness that a bodhisattva, or someone who wants to be a bodhisattva and follow that path, has to work on, has to overcome. And then ignorance. So this is our old friend we've heard about many times, believing in everything as truly existing, inherently existing, the opposite to emptiness. Okay, so that's another obstacle to the practice of bodhicitta. So bodhisattva does need to cultivate the wisdom that understands emptiness of inherent existence, true existence. And that's one of the 6 perfections. So we're going to get to that later. We'll go through the 6 perfections. So the 6th perfection is the perfection of wisdom. So that's where bodhisattva is cultivating this wisdom of emptiness, which is the direct antidote that counteracts ignorance that sees everything as truly existent. And in that section of the book, Yangsi Rinpoche also talks about how important it is to cultivate renunciation, which was back in the previous section of the Lam Rim, the medium scope. Because if we don't have a good understanding of samsara and all the suffering and causes of suffering of samsara, then that will be an obstacle to really cultivating compassion for others. So to really have compassion for other beings, we do need to understand very well samsara and how they are stuck in samsara, how they are suffering in samsara. So he says, if we have difficulties cultivating compassion and bodhicitta, we might need to go back and do more contemplation of the medium scope, the points there. Okay, so I thought I wasn't sure I would have time to get through all of that in 1 hour. I did. It's been a bit rushed, but I think probably most of these ideas you have heard before, not totally new. It's just reviewing them and putting them in, showing where all these ideas fit in the overall structure of the path to enlightenment, to Buddhahood. So for next class, the pages, I'll send you an email, but the pages to read for the next class will be page 323 and 324. They're on the last slide of that file that you have. Okay, so we don't have time for questions, but I think next week I'll be meeting again. I'll be joining the Meeting the Dharma seminar. And there's still a few questions left from last time I didn't have time to answer, so I'll take care of those. But if you have additional questions, you can send those to me through Karina, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's just take a moment to mentally dedicate the positive energy of spending this time looking at the Bodhisattva's path, how a person cultivates bodhicitta, the meditations they do to develop bodhicitta. Hopefully we got some inspiration from this, some positive thoughts from this. And so let's dedicate this positive energy we've created to all living beings. May it bring them peace and happiness, not just ordinary happiness, but may it help them have all the happiness, all the way up to full enlightenment, Buddhahood.